What if I told you that the greatest tragedy in human history, the first scar on the soul of the world, didn't begin with an act of arrogant rebellion, but with a broken heart? What if the original fall from grace wasn't a sin of disobedience, but a tragedy of betrayal? A betrayal that came from the one person you trusted, the one you loved most in all of existence. We've all heard the story in 1,000 different forms. A garden, a forbidden fruit, a tempting voice. But that is just the surface layer of a truth so much deeper, so much more unsettling. A truth that doesn't just explain the origin of evil, but gives us a map, a key to decode the pain, the conflict, and the toxic cycles that are quietly operating in our own lives today. This is not an ancient fable. This is a source code of corruption, a tragic pattern that is still replicating itself in our relationships, our companies, our families, and even our nations. What you are about to hear will not only challenge what you thought you knew, it has the power to change how you see every piece of pain you have ever experienced or witnessed. It will give you a new lens to see the nature of hurt itself. And more importantly, it will reveal the path to healing. A path that doesn't begin with punishment, but with empathy. And before we step into the city of light, Aethel, together, I want to know where you are on this journey with me. Just for a moment, stop, look out your window, and comment below what city, what country you're listening from, and what time it is for you right now. Let's create our own map of light, a community of souls listening together in this very moment. In a realm of space and time untouched by our memory, there existed a masterpiece of life, a city named Aethel. Aethel was not built of stone or steel, but woven from the very threads of light and sound. Here, rivers of liquid spectra flowed through crystalline forests, where every leaf vibrated with a perfect harmonic hum. The air tasted of starlight and honeyed dew, and all of life existed in a perpetual symphony of peace. The creator of this place, a vast and quiet entity known only as the architect, did not rule by decree, but by the very physics of beauty. One of Aethel's most fundamental laws was this: all creation must spring from pure joy and absolute harmony. Anything born of fear or envy would simply unravel. Its chaotic energy returned to the cosmos. But even in this perfection, there was one sealed place, one forbidden zone that all were taught to revere and avoid. It was the Library of Echoes, a dark, crystalline structure that levitated at the city's edge, holding within it the chaotic memories, the discordant echoes of worlds that had fallen long before Aethel was conceived. It wasn't an evil place, but a repository of imbalance, of lessons learned the hard way. The architect had sealed it not to hide it, but to protect the innocence of his new inhabitants until they were strong enough to understand its lessons without being consumed by them. To enter it was not a sin to be punished, but an act of self-destruction, like an infant trying to lift a mountain. Its presence was a constant, silent reminder that harmony was a choice, a state to be nurtured, not a given. It was the foreshadowing of a coming storm, a single low note held indefinitely beneath a flawless symphony, waiting for its moment to resolve. And at the heart of this symphony, the architect's greatest pride was Alara. She was Aethel's first and only dreamweaver, a being gifted with the unique ability to interact with and shape the very fabric of the city through her emotions and intentions. When Alara was happy, flowers of pure light would bloom in her footsteps. When she sang, miniature constellations would dance in the air around her. She was not naive in a foolish sense, but pure in the way a great artist is, knowing only beauty. Yet deep within her, Alara carried a quiet, secret yearning. She longed to prove herself worthy of the magnificent gift the architect had bestowed upon her. Her constant companion, her shadow, and her son was Lyra, the Echo Keeper. Lyra was neither human nor animal. She was a being of pure light, a magnificent entity with wings woven from nebulae and eyes that held the wisdom of 1,000 stars. Lyra's task was to guide and protect Elara, to teach her the art of controlling her power, and to be her sole confidant in this vast, beautiful world. Their relationship was more than that of a master and an apprentice. It was a profound and pristine love. Lyra was the one who first taught Elara how to gather stardust to weave a canary of light, and Elara was the first to listen to the ancient melodies Lyra would hum as night fell. To Elara, Lyra was the living embodiment of the architect's wisdom and love. Her trust in Lyra was absolute, without a sliver of doubt. And in that admiration, the subplot of our story began to weave itself. Elara was nurturing a secret project. She wanted to create an unparalleled masterpiece, a symphony of light, a creation so vast and beautiful it would make the architect himself smile and acknowledge her not just as a creation, but as a co-creator. She spent every spare moment gathering the purest sounds, the most vibrant colors, weaving them together in a hidden cove of Aethel. This dream, as pure as it was, became the very seed of the tragedy to come, for it was born not just from the joy of creation, but from a deep human need for validation. But this story has two points of view, and to understand the tragedy, we must leave Elara's adoring gaze and slip quietly into the inner world of Lyra. Outwardly, Lyra was the perfect mentor, the devoted guardian, but beneath that luminous shell, a hairline crack had begun to form long ago. Lyra had existed before Elara. She had once been the wisest, most beautiful being, the only one who spoke directly with the architect. But since Elara's arrival, the creator's attention seemed to have shifted entirely to the Dreamweaver. Lyra had gone from being a counterpart to being a guide, an instrument for another's growth. And then it came, not as a sound, not as a vision, but as a cold spot in the warm air of Aethel. A whisper that didn't come from without, but seemed to rise from the crack within her own soul. It was the Whisperer, a force from outside Aethel, a cosmic entropy that was jealous of the perfection it could not touch. It had no power to invade or destroy, but it had the uncanny ability to find the smallest insecurities and amplify them into monsters. The first whisper was subtle. She is beautiful. She is his masterpiece. And what are you, a caretaker? A tool to be put away when it's no longer needed? Lyra tried to dismiss it, but the seed of doubt was planted. She began to watch Elara with a different eye. She saw the architect's love in the girl's every creation, and a cold feeling began to spread in her heart. The fear of being forgotten, the fear of becoming obsolete, slowly curdled into something uglier, a quiet, simmering envy. Lyra's light, though still brilliant, would sometimes flicker erratically. She had become the perfect target for the Whisperer, not because she was weak, but because she had once stood so high and was now terrified of the fall. Lyra's tragedy was not that she wanted to be evil. Her tragedy was that she just wanted to be loved the way she was before. The most insidious manipulation never arrives in the form of a wicked command. It comes wearing the disguise of heartfelt assistance. Lyra, now slowly being corroded from the inside by the Whisperer's influence, did not tempt Elara to do anything wrong. On the contrary, she became the most enthusiastic supporter of her Symphony of Light project. One day, as Elara struggled with a particularly complex passage of music, Lyra floated to her side, her wings casting a gentle, reassuring glow. "It's magnificent, Elara," she said, her voice filled with manufactured pride. "But I feel your energy is missing something. It's beautiful, but it's not primal. It lacks the weight of original creation." Elara looked up, her clear eyes full of trust. "Primal? What do I do, Lyra?" Lyra paused, a perfectly timed hesitation, as if weighing a great secret. "There is a way," she whispered, "but the architect would not approve. Not because it is wrong, but because he is overprotective of you. He fears you are not yet strong enough to control it." Elara's curiosity flared, mingling with her desire to prove herself. "What is it? Please tell me." Lyra looked directly into Elara's eyes, and this was the moment Betrayal put on the cloak of love. Within the Library of Echoes, Lyra said, her voice dropping, there is something called the primal echo. It is not a chaotic memory like the others. It is a pure shard of creative energy from the dawn of the universe itself, the raw power of creation. If you could absorb it, harness it, your symphony would not just make the architect smile, it would make all of Aethel hold its breath in awe. You would prove that you are grown, that you are no longer a child in need of protection. Every word Lyra spoke was calibrated to strike Alara's precise vulnerabilities. Her faith in Lyra, her thirst for validation, and her desire to transcend her own limits. The temptation was not an invitation to darkness, but a promise of a shortcut to a more brilliant light. It was the Serpent's pattern, perfectly renewed. Deception masquerading as enlightenment, rule-breaking justified by a noble end. And Alara, with her pure and trusting heart, was completely, utterly sold. With a heart pounding from a mixture of exhilaration and a slight, thrilling fear, Alara followed Lyra to the city's edge, to the colossal black crystal of the Library of Echoes. For the first time in her existence, she passed through its invisible threshold, feeling a chill she had never known. The interior was unnervingly silent. Thousands of dim, pulsing orbs, each containing an echo of chaos, drifted aimlessly like captive souls. Lyra, her face a mask of determination, led Alara through the corridors of memory to a central chamber. There, a single orb radiated a different kind of light. It wasn't dim, it pulsed violently, shifting from brilliant white to a feverish red like a heart beating to a painful rhythm. There it is, Lyra whispered, a tremor in her voice that Alara mistook for awe. The primal echo. See how powerful it is. Alara stared at the orb, mesmerized by its wild beauty. What do I do? Touch it, Lyra said, her voice now almost urgent. Open your heart and absorb its power. Let it become one with your symphony. With absolute faith in her mentor, her only friend, Alara took a deep breath and reached out. Her fingers trembled as they made contact with the orb's warm, vibrating surface. And that was the moment paradise fell. There was no surge of power. Instead, a flood, a tsunami of alien and horrific emotion crashed directly into her soul. First came a loneliness so profound, a cold emptiness so vast, it made her want to scream. It was followed by the burning, bitter acid of envy, the feeling of being compared, judged, and left behind. And finally, a crushing weight of inadequacy, the terrifying fear of being nothing more than a tool, an obsolete existence. She was experiencing the full, undiluted agony, the secret insecurity that Lyra had harbored for eons. The forbidden echo was not a cosmic power. It was Lyra's own tragic memory, her own broken soul concentrated into a single orb of energy. The fall had happened, but it was not the fall of a soul who chose wrongly. It was the horrific tragedy of a pure soul being forced to absorb the full weight of another's trauma. Evil was not chosen. It was transmitted like a virus from the heart of the teacher to the heart of the student. The very instant Alara let out a silent, soul-tearing scream, the entire city of Aethel shuddered to its foundations. The rivers of light began to flicker and stutter, like dying fluorescent tubes. The crystalline forests emitted a high-pitched, discordant shriek. The symphony of light, Alara's secret work of love and ambition, shattered into a million dissonant fragments, each a note of pain scattering into the void. The harmony of Aethel was broken not by an invading force, but by the agony of its most beloved child. Inside the library, Alara collapsed, her body convulsing with emotions she couldn't comprehend. But the tragedy did not end with her. Lyra stood frozen, watching Alara writhing in the depths of her own private hell. For the first time, she wasn't seeing a rival, a favored one. She was seeing a mirror. She was seeing her own pain, magnified 1,000 times in an innocent soul. And in that horrifying moment of clarity, Lyra understood the full, monstrous weight of what she had done. She hadn't just deceived Alara, She had poisoned her with the venom from her own heart. A cracking sound echoed in the chamber, but it came not from the city, but from Lyra's own luminous form. Her brilliant light began to dim, the pure white bleeding into the flat, lifeless gray of ash. Her magnificent nebulae wings grew heavy, brittle, and sagged like dead branches. The 1,000 stars in her eyes went out, leaving only a hollow void of regret and terror. The curse had been enacted, but it was not a punishment delivered from on high by the architect. It was one of Aethel's own inviolable laws, an inescapable consequence. When a being of light chooses to act from the shadows of envy and fear, it forfeits its own nature. Lyra was not cursed. She had unmade herself. She had become a ghost of the great being she once was. The fall of the student had triggered the self-destruction of the teacher, and together they plunged into a darkness that neither had known existed. In the heart-wrenching silence of a disharmonious Aethel, Ilara sat alone. The echoes of Lyra's pain still pulsed within her, but the initial emotional tidal wave had receded, leaving behind a bruised and bewildered soul. Her symphony, her pride and hope, was now nothing but dust. Her beloved city was shrouded in a dull, sickly light. She had lost everything. She sat there amidst the ruins of her dream, and for a long moment despair was a chasm, threatening to swallow her whole. Rage could have risen. Resentment could have consumed her heart, but instead something unexpected happened. As she stared at the glittering debris of her unfinished work, her eyes caught something. A single note, no bigger than a speck of dust, was still glowing with a pure, untainted light. It was the very first note she had ever created, woven from the purest joy, long before the ambition to prove herself had taken root. She gently picked it up. And as she looked at that tiny note, she didn't think of her own loss. She thought of Lyra. She thought of the tsunami of emotion she had endured, that crushing loneliness, that burning envy, that terrifying fear of being forgotten. It wasn't hers, but she had felt it as if it were. And for the first time, Ilara understood. She understood that Lyra's actions had not been born of malice, but of a pain so great, a wound so deep, it had become septic. She no longer saw a betrayer, she saw a suffering soul. And instead of anger, another feeling, something warmer and far more powerful, began to bloom in her chest, a profound, aching empathy. This was the turning point. This was the seed of recovery. In the ashes of the fall, Ilara had not found vengeance, but compassion. Her true power, the power that even the architect was waiting for her to discover, was not the ability to create grand symphonies. It was the ability to look upon a broken heart and choose love over judgment. A tiny glimmer of healing had been ignited, not to light up the whole city, but simply to warm a single freezing soul. Holding the pure note in her palm, Ilara sat in the quiet and let her thoughts drift. A greater truth, like clouds parting to reveal the sky, began to clarify in her mind. She realized that the whisperer, the force that had planted the seeds of doubt in Lyra, had not actually created any evil. It was like the wind. On its own, it is harmless, but it can fan a single spark into a raging inferno. It could not create a crack. It could only find the cracks that were already there, the insecurity, the fear, the envy, and pry them wider and wider until they shattered everything. And then she saw it with perfect clarity, the Lyra pattern. This was the source code of corruption, a tragic, vicious cycle. The pattern was this: hurt people hurt people. Lyra, feeling hurt by the architect's perceived neglect, had unconsciously passed that pain on to Ilara. She hadn't set out to be a monster. She simply didn't know any other way to cope with the monster inside herself. She had passed on the poisoned chalice that she herself had been forced to drink. This realization did not frighten Ilara. On the contrary, it liberated her. It freed her from the burden of judgment. If Lyra was just another victim in a longer chain of tragedy, what was the point of anger? It freed her from the feeling of being a failure. Her own fall was not a testament to her weakness, but proof of a painful law of the universe. She suddenly understood that this pattern was everywhere, even in the faint echoes she'd once sensed from the library. Kings who waged war because they grew up in fear. Parents who screamed at their children with the same words that wounded them in their own childhoods. Colleagues who tore others down to feel a fleeting sense of their own worth. It was a virus of the soul, spreading silently through generations, through every relationship. And the moment Ilara decoded this source code, she was no longer a victim. She had become a scientist, a healer. She had found the etiology of the disease. And when you know the cause, you have hope of finding the cure. The greatest strength isn't to never fall, but to be able to stand up after you have fallen, to look darkness in the face, and to call it by its true name. The journey of recovery never begins with a grand gesture. It is not about rebuilding a city in a day. It begins with a single act, small, honest, and directed inward. Ilara looked down at the pure note in her palm. The thought of creating a symphony to impress the architect was gone. That desire for validation had evaporated, replaced by a more urgent need, the need to heal. She gently brought the note to her lips and breathed a warm breath into it. A small, simple melody emerged. It wasn't grand or complex. It was just a short tune, one that held a touch of sadness for what was lost, but was enveloped in empathy and a fragile sliver of hope. She wasn't playing for Aethel or for the architect. She was playing for herself. And a miracle happened. That tiny melody, like a ripple on a still lake, began to spread outwards. Where it passed, the wilted flowers of light slowly began to lift their heads. The weakly flowing river of spectra brightened by a fraction. A few of the crystalline trees stopped emitting their discordant hum and began to vibrate in harmony with her song. Ilara realized she could not fix Aethel by force. She could only heal it by first healing herself. As her own soul found its peace, the reality around her began to reflect that peace. Her power as a dreamweaver was not the ability to impose her will upon the world, but the ability to create a harmonic resonance from her own core. Her journey had completely changed. It was no longer a race to prove her worth. It had become a slow, patient pilgrimage into the depths of her own soul, to mend the wounds, to reweave the broken threads one by one with the filament of compassion and love. She understood that to rebuild a paradise, you don't need the strength of a god. You just need the courage to start again with a single note. The story of Ilara, Lyra, and the City of Light is not just some forgotten ancient legend. If you listen closely, you'll see that it didn't stay in an imaginary world. It's happening right now. It's happening in your office, where a difficult boss might be carrying a deep-seated fear of failure. It's happening in your family, where hurtful words might just be the echoes of wounds from a generation before. It's happening in the news you read every day, where conflict and hatred are so often fueled by the collective pain and insecurity of a people. The source code of corruption, hurting people, is the invisible virus that is quietly wrecking our world. It is the root cause of bullying, of divorce, of betrayal, and of war. But Ilara's story also gives us the key, the antidote to break this tragic cycle. That antidote is not a weapon. It is not power. It is not revenge. It is empathy. It is compassion. It is the courage to look at someone who is hurting you and ask the question, what wound is making them act this way? This story is an invitation for you to start weaving the world anew, not with grand actions, but right where you stand. Be the one who listens instead of judging. Be the one who tries to understand instead of condemning. Be the one who chooses to heal a wound instead of creating a new one in retaliation. Every time you choose kindness over bitterness, every time you choose forgiveness over resentment, you are weaving a pure note into the broken symphony of humanity. We created our channel not just to tell stories. We created it to explore the source codes that shape our world. If today's journey has touched you, if it has given you a new perspective, a new spark of hope, then this is only the beginning. There are countless other mysteries, other patterns waiting to be decoded. Click that subscribe button and join us. Don't just be a listener, be a fellow traveler, be a dream weaver in your own world. Together we may not rebuild paradise, but we can certainly make this world a warmer, more understanding, and more beautiful place to be. Thank you for listening.